Every afternoon, just before the sun began its descent, a little girl with 2 braids and a backpack too big for her shoulders walked through the cemetery gates. She didn't carry flowers. She didn't cry. She simply walked, quietly, purposefully, to the same spot where she would sit cross-legged and speak in whispers to the ground. No one knew her name. No one knew why she came. But she never missed a single day. At first, people thought it was just a child playing pretend. Maybe she was waiting for someone who'd never arrive, or imagining a story in her mind. But when she began leaving small objects, a toy piano, a pair of baby shoes, a ribbon worn at the edges, curiosity turned to unease. One man, a frequent visitor to the cemetery, began to notice the girl. Her routine was too exact, her silence too heavy. One day, driven by something he couldn't explain, he decided to follow her from a distance. He watched as she walked past the graves of strangers, greeting them like old friends. She knew their names. She cleaned the dust from their headstones with care. She even sang, not loudly, but with a sweetness that lingered in the air like the scent of jasmine. And then she stopped at one grave in particular. She placed a hand on the cold stone, knelt, and whispered something that made the man freeze where he stood. Her voice trembled with memory, with loss far too deep for someone so young. Unable to walk away, the man stepped closer, just enough to read the name on the grave. And when he did, his knees gave out. It wasn't the name that shattered him. It was the date. A child, the same age as the girl, buried just 6 months ago. But the last name matched his own. And the moment he saw the photograph etched into the stone, he realized the impossible truth. The little girl was visiting the grave of the sister he had never met, the daughter he had never known existed. What happened next would unravel a story buried beneath years of silence, broken families, and choices made in pain. A story that would bring 2 strangers face to face with a bond they didn't know they shared. And it all began with a little girl, a quiet routine, and a stranger brave enough to follow her into the place where the living speak to the dead, and sometimes the dead speak back. The man's name was Richard Lawson. He wasn't the type to cry easily. A retired delivery driver with a tough past and hands hardened by decades of work, Richard had seen enough of life to stop believing in miracles or in ghosts. But that afternoon in the cemetery, when he saw the name Amara Lawson carved into the white stone, something inside him cracked open. He stumbled back, gasping for air, and dropped to his knees beside the grave. The little girl turned her head slowly. Her eyes were wide but calm, as if she had known this moment would come. She didn't speak at first. She simply reached into her pocket and pulled out a photograph. It was creased, old, and clearly loved. She held it out to him. Richard's trembling hands accepted it, and as he looked at the image, he felt the earth tilt beneath him. It was Amara, the baby he never met, cradled in the arms of the woman he once loved and left. He hadn't seen Rachel, Amara's mother, in over 7 years. Their relationship had been brief, intense, and ended badly. She had never told him she was pregnant. He hadn't even known there was a child. And now the child was gone. His daughter had lived and died without his knowledge, and the only link he had to her now stood before him, small, solemn, and impossibly brave. "I'm her sister," the little girl said softly. Her name was Amara. She was 6. She liked purple, singing frogs, and peanut butter with bananas. Richard couldn't respond. His throat closed. The girl continued, her voice clear despite the breeze. "She said she wanted to meet you someday. She drew you a picture. Want to see it?" She reached into her bag and pulled out a crumpled drawing. A tall man with a gray beard, holding a balloon. Above it, written in shaky letters, were the words, "For Daddy." Something inside Richard shattered then. Not because of guilt, though he carried plenty of that, but because for the first time in years, he was facing a truth he hadn't even known to grieve. A daughter, a family, a loss he didn't have time to prepare for. And now this child, his child's sister, was standing before him, offering him not judgment, but connection. They sat together in silence for a long time, the little girl gently brushing leaves from the edge of the headstone, while Richard stared into the stillness, trying to process everything. Her name, he learned, was Maya. She was Amara's half-sister, born just a year after her. Rachel had remarried, started a new life, and build a family that Richard had never been part of. But now, that life was missing someone, and Maya came every day, hoping Amara wouldn't be alone. "Why do you come here every day?" Richard finally asked. Maya shrugged, her eyes fixed on the stone. "Because Amara hated being alone," she said. "She was scared of the dark. Mommy says cemeteries aren't scary because they're full of love. But I think they can still get lonely." The way she spoke, with such gentle certainty, made Richard's throat tighten again. This child was carrying a weight no one her age should have to bear. Maya began to tell him stories about how Amara once tried to build a treehouse with cardboard boxes, how she sang off-key but insisted she was ready for the voice, how she would make up silly rhymes about clouds and cried when she saw sad commercials. Richard listened, each story piercing deeper into his chest. He was grieving someone he'd never held, never known, but the love he felt was real, and that love now had nowhere to go. When Maya stood up to leave, she looked at him with a softness that nearly undid him completely. "You can come tomorrow, if you want." She'd like that. She'd want you to come. Then, without waiting for an answer, she turned and walked away, backpack bouncing slightly, her braids catching the golden light of the setting sun. Richard remained on the ground, the photo still in his hand, the drawing tucked carefully into his coat. And for the first time in years, as the shadows lengthened across the cemetery, Richard cried. Not just for the daughter he never knew, but for the years lost, the silence endured, and the strange, impossible beauty of being invited, by a child, to step into the love he thought he had forever missed. The next day, Richard returned to the cemetery. He brought a small bouquet of wildflowers, not store-bought, but picked by hand from the patch behind his apartment complex. He didn't know what Amara had liked best, but the purple ones reminded him of what Maya had said. She liked purple. That thought alone had stayed with him all night, echoing in the still corners of his memory, like a lullaby he was only now learning to sing. Maya was already there when he arrived. She sat with her back against the gravestone, humming a soft tune. When she saw him, she didn't jump or smile wide. She simply nodded, like she'd been expecting him. "Hi, Mr. Richard," she said. "Or should I call you something else?" He froze. He didn't know how to answer. Was he Dad? Was that word too big? Too soon? But Maya, sensing his hesitation, smiled gently. "It's okay. You don't have to decide today." They sat together again. Maya pulled out another item from her backpack, this time a worn-out stuffed bunny with one ear, nearly detached. "This was hers," she whispered. "She used to talk to him like he was real. Sometimes I still do." She placed the bunny gently against the stone. Richard watched her, the ache in his chest stretching wider with every second. It wasn't just what she brought. It was the ritual of it. The care. The love. He began to open up, slowly. He told her about the time he'd almost become a father in his 20s, before fear made him run. About the job he lost, and the years he spent convincing himself he wasn't cut out to raise anyone. "I thought I'd ruin a child," he admitted. "I didn't know I'd already had one, and lost her before I could even try." Maya didn't interrupt. She just listened, her hands folded quietly in her lap. As the wind stirred the grass, Maya leaned against him, just slightly, her head resting near his arm. "I think Amara would have liked you," she said. "She used to say she wished she had a big, strong dad who smelled like peppermint and told bedtime stories. You kind of smell like peppermint." Richard chuckled. Not a loud laugh, but something that cracked through the grief for a second. And in that one moment, surrounded by loss and love, he felt worthy. Richard began showing up every day, not just to grieve, but to learn. Each visit with Maya peeled back another layer of the daughter he never knew. Her quirks, her fears, her dreams. One day, Maya brought a small notebook filled with drawings Amara had made. The pages were full of unicorns and stars, castles and oceans. But on the last page, there was a drawing of their whole family: Rachel, Maya, Amara, and a tall man with gray hair holding all their hands. She called him her wish dad, Maya said. She said he was somewhere out there, and that he looked like the man in her dreams. Richard felt tears rise again. How could a child he never met have imagined him so clearly? And why did that vision feel more real than anything he had held in years? The drawing wasn't just sweet, it was devastating. It was a mirror to a life he could have had. He asked Maya more about Rachel. Her eyes dimmed a little. She doesn't talk about Amara much, she said. She thinks it hurts me, but I want to talk about her. I need to. Richard understood. Silence, though meant to protect, often strangles. He had lived in silence for too long. Now, sitting beside a child who shared his blood, he saw how vital it was to speak, to remember, to honor. That evening, Richard bought a small picture frame. He placed Amara's drawing inside and set it on the mantel in his living room, next to a candle he promised to light each night. It was the first time he had ever created a space in his home for someone other than himself. And it felt right, like something sacred, like a seed finally being planted in soil that had waited years for rain. Maya called him one evening. Her voice was quiet. Would you like to come to our house? Mommy wants to talk. Richard felt his pulse quicken. He hadn't seen Rachel since the breakup, since the night everything had fallen apart. But maybe, just maybe, this wasn't about reopening old wounds. Maybe this was about stitching something back together, something bigger than anger, something rooted in love, the kind that survives even when we think it never began. Richard stood outside the house for a long time before knocking. It looked nothing like he remembered. Newer siding, a garden with hand-painted stones, wind chimes that danced in the breeze. But it carried something familiar, too, the kind of stillness that comes after heartbreak. When the door finally opened, Rachel stood there, holding a dish towel in one hand and surprise in her eyes. For a moment, they just stared at each other, both searching for a version of the past that made sense now. She didn't invite him in right away. Instead, she stepped outside, closing the door gently behind her. Maya told me you've been visiting, she said. Her voice wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. It was careful, like walking barefoot across broken glass. Richard nodded, unsure what to say. I didn't know, he whispered. I swear to you, Rachel. I didn't know. She looked down, then back at him. I believe you, she said. And just like that, a wall that had stood for 7 years cracked, just a little. They sat on the porch steps like they once had, back when things were simple and fleeting and full of possibility. Richard told her everything. The moment he saw Maya in the cemetery, the photo, the drawing, the words that made him crumble. Rachel listened, her face unreadable. When he finished, she took a long breath and said, I didn't tell you because I was angry and scared. And then she was gone. And I thought it was too late for anything. They were both right, in a way. Too late for Amara to ever know him, but not too late for what came next. Rachel reached in her pocket and pulled out a small locket. Inside was a photo of Amara and Maya, cheek to cheek. She carried this everywhere, Rachel said, handing it to him. I think she hoped you'd find your way someday. I think maybe she believed you would. Richard's hands shook as he held it, as if cradling something alive. The front door opened again, and Maya peeked out. You coming in? She asked, eyes hopeful. Rachel nodded, stepping aside. Come in, Richard, she said softly. We're not who we were, but maybe we can start from where we are. And with that, he crossed a threshold he never thought he'd see again. Not just into a house, but into a second chance. One wrapped in grief, yes, but also grace. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and warm bread. Maya led him to the living room, where toys were scattered, and framed drawings lined the walls like stained glass windows of childhood. One frame caught his eye, a crayon sketch of 2 girls under a tree, with stars in the sky and the words "Best Sisters Forever" scribbled underneath. Maya saw him looking and smiled. That was the last one she made. They sat together, the 3 of them, in a silence that didn't ache. Rachel brought tea, and for a while, they just existed in the same room, as if the universe had paused to allow this moment to breathe. Richard looked at Maya and asked gently, Can you tell me more about Amara? She nodded eagerly and began describing her favorite songs, how she hated green beans, how she once tried to make a robot out of spoons and rubber bands. Rachel joined in, too. At first, her voice faltered, but soon it found rhythm, painting pictures of birthday parties, Halloween costumes, and bedtime stories. Richard listened with reverence, committing every detail to memory. Each word was a thread, and he was weaving them into something whole. For the first time, Amara wasn't just a name or a photo. She was real to him, alive in their stories, vivid in their love. That night, as he walked home, Richard didn't feel the same weight he'd carried before. Yes, there was grief, thick and permanent. But there was also something else, belonging. He was no longer a ghost in his daughter's story. He was a voice in the chorus of those who remembered her. And he would continue to remember her, through Maya, through Rachel, through every step he now took forward. He placed the locket beside the frame, drawing, and lit the candle on his mantle. This time, he didn't cry. He closed his eyes and said her name aloud, not just once, but 3 times. Amara, Amara, Amara. A name he never got a call in life, but one he would now carry, every day, with reverence and with love. The days that followed unfolded with gentle purpose. Richard and Maya began a new rhythm, one not built on obligation, but on something deeper, connection. They continued to meet at the cemetery, not out of habit, but because it had become sacred ground. Maya started bringing coloring supplies and asked Richard to draw with her. It doesn't have to be good, she'd say, just real. So he did. Awkward shapes, crooked hearts, trees with too many branches. Each page a small offering to a child they both missed. Rachel noticed the change in Maya. Her laughter returned in full, not just as an echo. Her appetite, once dulled by grief, returned with bursts of excitement over pancakes and strawberries. And her sleep, once broken by cries for Amara, settled into peaceful rest. One evening, as Maya drifted off to sleep, Rachel stood at the doorway and whispered, "Thank you," to the man sitting beside her daughter's bed, holding a storybook in trembling hands. But grief doesn't dissolve, it transforms. And for Rachel, the transformation came in quiet moments. The way she'd reach for an extra plate by instinct, the ache when folding laundry and finding Amara's old t-shirts. Richard began helping around the house, fixing a broken drawer, repainting the mailbox. He never asked for space. He simply created it, one small act at a time, until it became clear that healing was no longer a solo path. Maya, sensing the shift, began asking questions. Would Amara still like me, even if I laugh again? Do you think she knows we're okay? Richard always answered gently. She'd love your laugh. She'd be proud of your brave heart. And Rachel, slowly, found the strength to join those answers. Grief doesn't mean you stop living, she said. It just means you carry love in a different way. One morning, Maya brought a jar of paint to the cemetery. I want her grave to be happy, she said. Together, she and Richard painted tiny stars along the edges of the stone. Gold, blue, purple, Amara's favorite colors. Passers-by paused, unsure, but none interrupted. Some even smiled, because in that small act of beauty, love had made itself visible. And Amara, though gone, was more present than ever. Summer arrived with warmth and new beginnings. Richard found himself laughing more, not the polite kind, but full from the chest, like a man who had been underwater and finally surfaced. He and Rachel had begun to talk more freely, not just about the past, but about now. About Maya's school, the books she loved, the tiny garden she had started in the backyard with tomatoes that never quite grew. These small things felt like lifelines. One afternoon, Maya came running into the house holding a small, bruised tomato. It's ugly, she said, but I grew it. Richard took it from her hands and said, It's perfect. Rachel watched from the kitchen, her heart tight. That moment, that simple act, said everything she needed to know. Richard wasn't filling a role. He was becoming something real, day by day, with quiet grace. They decided to have a small gathering on what would have been Amara's birthday. Not a funeral, not a vigil, just a celebration. Balloons, cupcakes, photos on strings. Maya made a playlist of songs Amara had loved, and Richard built a wooden bench to place near her grave, a place to sit, to remember, to just be. They called it Amara's spot, and when the day came, it felt like sunlight after years of winter. Neighbors came, teachers, even the florist from the corner shop who used to give Amara free daisies when she walked by. There were tears, yes, but also laughter, stories, life. And as they released paper lanterns into the sky that evening, Maya whispered, Do you think she can see us? Richard placed a hand on her shoulder and said, I think she's been with us the whole time. That night, as the family returned home, the house felt different. Not whole, because some losses never leave room for that, but held, supported by memory, by love, and by the new beginning they had chosen to build. one not rooted in regret, but in honor. And Richard, once a man adrift in his own silence, had become part of something sacred. Not a replacement, not a fixer, simply a father. As the weeks passed, Richard's bond with Maya grew stronger. They developed little rituals, watering Amara's flowers together, baking lumpy cookies every Friday, and watching cartoons that made no sense to Richard but made Maya laugh until she hiccuped. These moments weren't loud. They weren't grand, but they were real, and in their quiet simplicity, they began stitching something permanent between them. One day, as they were walking home from the cemetery, Maya slipped her hand into his and asked, "Do you think I'm allowed to be happy again?" The question stopped a mid-step. He knelt to meet her eyes and said, "Happiness isn't betrayal. It's a way to carry her with you." Maya didn't say anything back, but she smiled, a full, warm, crooked-toothed smile. And that was answer enough. Rachel noticed it too, the way Maya began to dance again when she thought no one was watching, the way she hummed in the kitchen, the way she slept with both arms wide open like she had nothing left to guard. Grief had changed shape. It was no longer a shadow that followed them. It had become something quieter, more manageable, like a scar that doesn't hurt to touch, but reminds you where you've been. Richard began visiting Amara's grave alone sometimes, just to sit in silence. He talked to her about Maya, about Rachel, about the life he was trying to build. "I hope I'm doing okay," he'd whisper. "I hope you see this." He brought a new flower every time, always purple, and though no voice answered, the breeze often picked up just as he finished speaking, like a small response from the unseen. One evening, Maya brought him a hand-drawn certificate. It was written in marker and glitter, "World's best real-life dad." He stared at it, stunned. "You mean that?" he asked. Maya nodded. "It doesn't matter if you missed the beginning," she said. "You're here now." Richard hugged her tightly, feeling something anchor in him, not as a replacement for time lost, but as proof that love, when chosen, when nurtured, is never too late. News of Amara's spot began to spread quietly through the community. People who had lost someone started visiting, leaving small notes, flowers, or tokens of remembrance. The cemetery caretaker even built a small plaque beside the bench, with Rachel's permission, in memory of all the children who still live in laughter, even after they've left. It became more than a place to grieve. It became a place to connect, to remember without fear. One morning, a woman arrived carrying a single white lily. She didn't speak much. She sat on the bench, tears silently falling, and then left a photograph, a baby boy swaddled in blue. When Rachel found it later, she gently placed it beside Amara's bunny. The circle was widening. Grief, once isolating, was now building bridges between strangers who had never known how to say goodbye. Until now. Rachel and Richard started hosting small gatherings once a month. They called them memory nights. No speeches, no pressure, just candles, open space, and soft music. People came to speak their child's name, share a story, or sit quietly and feel less alone. It wasn't therapy. It was something older, something human, a space for the sacred practice of remembering together. Maya, now a little taller, often opened the evenings by reading poems she had written about Amara. They were simple, raw, and full of imagery only a child could think of. One poem described Amara as a star that hides in the sun, so I don't cry during the day. After reading it once, Maya looked up and said, "I'm not sad when I read these anymore. I just feel close to her." And that truth rippled through the room, like light breaking through a stained glass window. Richard never imagined his life would look like this, grounded in grief, shaped by memory, and yet filled with laughter and purpose. He had once believed that missing the beginning of Amara's life meant he forfeited the right to love her. But now he knew better. Love doesn't have a start date. It doesn't follow rules. It just shows up, day after day, flower after flower, story after story, until what was broken begins to feel whole again. Autumn brought with it a crispness that seemed to sharpen every color in the cemetery. The red's deeper, the gold's more alive. Maya called it Amara's favorite season, though no one really knew if that was true. She would have loved the sound of crunchy leaves, Maya insisted, skipping through the rows with her usual energy. Richard followed behind, smiling, holding a thermos of hot cocoa that she insisted he bring, because that's what real dads do. They had started decorating Amara's grave with the seasons. Not elaborate displays, just little touches. A tiny scarecrow figurine, a garland of orange and yellow leaves, a candle that flickered even in the wind. People passing by stopped more often now. Some left notes. Some just stood there for a moment, letting the stillness speak to something inside them that hadn't found words yet. Amara's spot had become more than a memory. It was a sanctuary. One afternoon, Maya pulled Richard aside. Her face was serious, the way it only was when something big was on her mind. "Do you think you could ever live with us?" she asked. Richard blinked, caught off guard. "Why?" She shrugged. "Because it feels right, and I think Amara would like it." Mommy didn't say no when I asked her. Richard looked toward the house. The thought had crossed his mind, but he never let it linger. Not until now. Rachel didn't rush into conversation. They sat on the porch that evening, wrapped in old blankets, a candle flickering between them. "She's been asking for a while," Rachel said. "I told her it's not that simple." Richard nodded. "I know. I wouldn't want to make it harder." Rachel looked at him, not through him, but into him. "You already came back once," she said. "And every day since you've stayed. That's not simple. That's everything." By the time the first snow fell, a drawer in the hallway had Richard's things in it. Not everything. Just a few socks, a shaving kit, a flannel shirt Maya called his dad uniform. It wasn't a move-in. It wasn't title. But it was a beginning. And for a man who thought his story had ended long ago, it felt like life. Not just returning, but blooming. Winter quieted the world. The cemetery, once buzzing with visitors, became a canvas of snow, untouched and reverent. Maya still visited, bundled in layers, her breath fogging the air as she read poems and left snow angels beside the grave. Richard always walked with her, brushing snow off Amara's name with gloved hands, his movements slow, like a father tucking his child in one more time. Inside the house, warmth lived in every corner. Rachel found herself humming again, old lullabies, forgotten melodies that Amara once loved. Richard cooked more often, filling the kitchen with the smell of rosemary and roasted chicken. He wasn't trying to replace anything. He was simply adding to what was already there. And somehow, his presence never felt like an intrusion. It felt like a missing piece returning to its place. Maya began asking more questions about the past. About Richard. About why he and Rachel had parted ways, and why Amara never got to meet him. They didn't lie. They didn't sugarcoat. They explained what it meant to be scared, to make mistakes, and to try again. Sometimes love takes the long way home, Richard told her. And Maya, wise beyond her years, nodded and said, "But at least it made it." Christmas came with bittersweet notes. A small stocking hung for Amara, filled with purple ribbon and notes from Maya. "She should still be part of this," Maya said simply. And she was. Her photo stayed at the center of the mantel, framed in light. Richard wrote her a letter that night, his first. It said everything he hadn't been able to speak aloud. He folded it carefully and placed it at her grave on Christmas morning, tucked beneath the snow. Rachel found him standing there, eyes closed, breath slow. She didn't speak. She just stood beside him, taking his hand. And in that moment, quiet, cold, but filled with something deeply alive, they stood not as two people haunted by what was lost, but as two people who had chosen to love anyway. Not perfectly, not painlessly, but completely. And in the frost-kissed silence of that December morning, love answered back. As the new year began, Richard found himself looking at life through a different lens. The guilt that had once kept him from believing he deserved any kind of joy had softened. In its place was a quiet sense of responsibility, not just to Rachel and Maya, but to the memory of the little girl he never got to hold. He began journaling each morning, filling notebooks with thoughts, stories, even apologies. "You're still teaching me how to be a father," he wrote to Amara. Even now. Maya started second grade that winter, and during family week, each child was asked to bring someone special to talk about what family meant to them. Maya chose Richard. "He's my almost dad," she told the teacher. "He wasn't here before, but now he never leaves." Richard stood at the front of the classroom, awkward but proud, holding Maya's hand as she beamed beside him. He didn't have the words that day, but his eyes said enough. Every child in that room saw what love looked like when it showed up late, but fully. Rachel, watching from the back of the classroom, felt something shift inside her. The anger she had once clung to, a defense mechanism against disappointment, had melted. What remained was a kind of quiet gratitude. For the second chance. For Maya's smile. For the man who had walked back into their lives not with grand gestures, but with consistent presence. Rachel realized that forgiveness had already happened. Not in a moment, but in thousands of small ones. That weekend, they decided to go through Amara's memory box together. Rachel brought it down from the top of the closet, a pink tin with stickers fading at the edges. Inside were her hospital bracelet, her first tooth, hand-drawn birthday cards, and a video on an old flash drive. They watched it together, huddled on the couch. Amara's voice, high and sweet, filled the room. "This is me, and this is my bunny, and this is my world." Maya laughed. Richard wept. Rachel held his hand the whole time. Afterward, Maya said something that stayed with them both. "I think Amara's happy we're all here now. Like, maybe this was supposed to happen. It's not the way we thought." And in the quiet that followed, they knew she was right. Life had unfolded in a way none of them could have written. Tragic, yes, but also unexpectedly redemptive. A story stitched with grief, but held together by grace. Spring approached slowly, each day a little longer, each breeze a little softer. The cemetery, blanketed in white for so many months, began to show signs of life again. Green buds along the fence, early blossoms near Mara's bench. Maya called them her flowers. "She sends them," she said, "so we know she's still here." Richard never argued. He had come to believe that children carried truths adults are too afraid to speak aloud. One afternoon, Richard brought a new birdhouse to hang on the tree closest to the grave. He and Maya painted it purple and gold, with tiny stars on the roof. "She loves stars," Maya whispered. "She used to say she'd live on one someday." When they hung it up, a robin landed nearby, chirping as if on cue. Maya gasped. She came to see it. Richard smiled and nodded. Of course she did. Rachel joined them more often now. The three of them, together, created new memories in the shadow of an old one. They planned a picnic by the grave on what would have been Amara's 8th birthday. Sandwiches, juice boxes, cupcakes. They sang her favorite silly song and told her everything that had happened since the last time they visited. Richard even brought a tiny letter he'd written, folded carefully and tied with ribbon. That night, back at home, Maya climbed into bed and asked, "Do you think we're a real family now?" Rachel sat beside her and smoothed her hair. "What do you think?" she asked. Maya paused, then said, "I think we're the kind of family who doesn't give up, even when it's hard." And in that moment, Rachel realized that no piece of paper, no timeline, no traditional structure could define what they had built. It was real because it was chosen, every day, by all of them. In the weeks that followed, Richard and Rachel began to speak more openly about the future. Not about titles, not about labels, just about staying, about building, about showing up. Because while some families begin with birth and some with vows, theirs had begun with grief and grown into something beautiful. Something no longer defined by loss, but by love that refused to let go. By summer, the house had evolved into something more than a structure. It had become a home. Richard now had a set of keys, a favorite coffee mug, and a chair on the porch that Maya had decorated with stickers spelling out Dad's spot. It was never officially declared, but everyone knew he belonged there. Not because of obligation, but because of presence, because, day after day, he kept showing up. One evening, Maya brought out a shoebox filled with folded papers. "Letters to Amara," she explained. "I've been writing them since she passed. I didn't show anyone before." Rachel and Richard sat beside her as she unfolded them one by one. Drawings, notes, memories, even a small comic strip. In each letter, Amara was a character, smiling, laughing, sometimes offering advice. Through those letters, it became clear Maya had never stopped talking to her sister. She had just found a new language. They decided to create a scrapbook, the Amara book, Maya called it. It became a sacred project. Every evening, the three of them would sit at the table, gluing pictures, writing captions, and sharing pieces of girl who had never truly left. The process was healing. Each page was like stitching a wound closed. not to forget the pain, but to protect the love underneath. Even the sad pages felt sacred. One page had a simple message written in Maya's handwriting. You missed a lot, but we're catching you up. Richard stared at those words for a long time. He had always carried guilt like armor. But now he felt something shift. He would never recover the years lost, but he could honor them. He could build something in their place. And maybe, just maybe, that could be enough. That night, he placed the scrapbook on a mantel, next to the candle and Amara's framed drawing. We're still writing your story, he whispered. You're still a part of everything. Outside, the wind stirred gently, and for a moment, he swore he heard a giggle. Maybe it was imagination. Or maybe, in some sacred way, Amara was listening to every word, every page, every heartbeat they had carried forward for her. As the summer days grew longer, Richard found himself watching Maya more closely, not out of worry, but in awe. She had grown in ways he couldn't fully articulate. Her resilience wasn't loud. It was subtle, steady, like the way she instinctively knew when someone needed a hug or when silence was safer than words. She had learned how to hold grief in one hand and joy in the other, without letting either overpower her. One morning, Maya asked if they could visit a different cemetery. There's a boy from my class whose brother passed, she said. He doesn't go because it makes him scared. But maybe if we go, it won't feel so scary for him anymore. Richard and Rachel looked at each other, both moved by her empathy. So they went, not because they had to, but because healing becomes even more powerful when it's shared. They brought flowers and paper birds folded by Maya. She placed one on a nearby stone and whispered, "You're not forgotten." It was a gesture that required no permission, no explanation. She was offering the same comfort she had once needed, and in doing so, became a guide for someone else's grief. Richard realized then, Amara's legacy was living not just through memory, but through action. Back at home, Rachel sat with Richard on the porch. "You've changed," she said quietly. "Not just with us, with the world." He nodded slowly. "I didn't think I had anything left to give," he admitted. "Turns out, I just hadn't found the right place to give it." Rachel smiled and rested her head on his shoulder. "You did more than give. You built something we didn't think we'd have again." As the sun dipped below the trees, casting long shadows across the yard, they sat together, a man, a woman, and a memory of a child who had brought them back to life. Not with drama, not with spectacle, but with a steady hand, a pointed finger, and a heart that had refused to stop loving. And somehow, in the quiet of that summer night, everything felt whole. Not perfect, but whole. September arrived with golden light and cooler evenings. Maya returned to school, her backpack a little heavier with books and her heart a little lighter. She had written an essay titled, "The Person Who Changed My Life." It wasn't about Amara, though her name appeared more than once. It was about Richard. He didn't show up at the beginning, she wrote, but he showed up when it mattered most. Her teacher, moved to tears, asked to read aloud in class. Maya agreed proudly. Richard didn't know about the essay until Rachel showed him a scanned copy. As he read it, he felt something unnameable rise in his chest, something deeper than pride, deeper than gratitude. It was a sense of redemption, a quiet voice inside whispering, "You may have missed the start, but you became part of the story." He placed the essay on the fridge next to Maya's other drawings, anchoring it there like a badge of honor. That fall, the cemetery saw new visitors, parents, siblings, neighbors who had heard about Amara's spot. Some came to cry, others just to sit. One woman left a note. "I never had a place to grieve my daughter. Thank you for giving her one." Rachel read it aloud during their next memory night, her voice shaking but strong. "This is what she's given us," she said. "A way to hold each other's sorrow without letting it crush us." They began collecting these notes in a jar, which Maya called the jar of light. "Whenever we feel sad," she said, "we can read one." Over time, the jar filled, not just with pain, but with beauty, with names spoken aloud, with proof that remembrance can be an act of love. And in every note, every folded prayer, Amara's legacy stretched further than they had ever imagined. One evening, as the wind picked up and the sky turned violet, Maya said, "Do you think she knows how much she's helped people?" Richard wrapped his arm around her and whispered, "I think she knows everything." It wasn't a line meant to soothe. It was a truth he now believed in his bones. Because sometimes the smallest lives leave the deepest prints, not in the world's headlines, but in the corners of the heart where love never dies. Rachel began journaling again. She hadn't touched a notebook since Amara's passing. The pain had always been too sharp. But now, the words came with ease. She wrote about Maya's strength, Richard's transformation, and the strange, quiet joy of rebuilding a life from broken pieces. "We're still fractured," she wrote in one entry. "But somehow, that makes us more beautiful, like stained glass, whole because of what was shattered." Richard started speaking at local grief support groups, always hesitant at first, but soon invited often. He never claimed to have answers. He simply told the truth. How he missed the beginning, how he found his daughter too late, and how another little girl helped him find his way back to love. People listened, not because he was eloquent, but because he was honest. And in every trembling word, they saw a piece of their own journey. Maya, now a storyteller in her own right, began writing short stories for other children who had lost siblings. She called them sky letters, tales where stars talked, clouds carried messages, and the moon delivered dreams. With Rachel's help, she turned them into a small printed book that they handed out at the cemetery on Amara's birthday. On the back cover, it simply said, "For every child still listening for a voice in the wind." On the anniversary of Amara's passing, they held a lantern release. Dozens gathered, holding glowing paper lanterns etched with names, poems, and hopes. As they lifted into the night sky, Maya looked up and whispered, "You're still my best friend." And beside her, Richard whispered his own promise, "I'll keep showing up. Every day." Rachel, her voice too full for words, simply closed her eyes and held them both. The lanterns floated until they became stars, or maybe they always were. And for that one night, the sky above them wasn't just vast, it was full. Full of love, of memory, of stories still unfolding. And as they stood beneath it, this unlikely family forged in loss and held together by love, they knew Amara was not just remembered. She was everywhere. The rhythm of life settled into something beautiful. Richard now woke each morning with purpose. He made breakfast, packed Maya's lunch, and left little notes in her bag. Simple phrases like "shine today," or "you are braver than you think." She saved them all in a shoebox under her bed, calling it her dad wisdom box. Sometimes, on hard days, she would pull one out and read it aloud like a prayer. Rachel watched the two of them, their laughter, their quiet rituals, their way of filling the house with warmth, and often found herself smiling without meaning to. There had been so much loss, but in that loss, something sacred had bloomed. Not a replacement for what had been taken, but a celebration of what had survived. A second chance, born not from perfection, but from showing up day after day. They began traveling on weekends, not far, to small towns, quiet lakes, nature trails. Each place became a memory, stitched onto the tapestry of their story. In one town, Maya found a field of wild violets. She picked a bundle and said, "For Amara." Richard helped her press them between the pages of her journal. Later, when they bloomed again at home, she whispered, "See, she came with us." The scrapbook continued to grow, now filled with new adventures alongside old memories. Maya insisted on writing a title across the front, "All the Ways We Remember." Underneath, she scribbled 3 names, hers, Richard's, and Amara's. "Because we're all in this together," she explained. Richard nodded. Always. Every page was another thread, binding them tighter, not despite their pain, but because of it. One night, Maya asked a question that caught Richard by surprise. "Do you think Amara would have liked who I'm becoming?" He smiled and answered without hesitation, "She would have admired your heart, the way you carry her, the way you keep going." Maya looked down, thinking. Then, with a shy grin, she said, "I think I'm becoming a little bit of her too." And Richard realized she already had, in her kindness, in her strength, in her unwavering love. Maya's 10th birthday arrived with ribbons, laughter, and a guest list full of friends who had never known Amara, but somehow felt her presence. Balloons floated across the ceiling, purple streamers danced in the breeze, and in the center of the cake was a single gold star. "She always wanted to be in the sky," Maya said. "Now she's part of everything." No one corrected her. Everyone understood. During the party, Maya stood up and read a short letter she had written. "Thank you, Amara, for being my first best friend, my forever sister, and for helping me find Dad. I hope you see all this. I hope you feel our love." The room was silent, not sad but moved. Even her young friends sat wide-eyed, holding their slices of cake like something holy had just passed through the room. Later that night, after everyone had gone, the three of them sat under the porch light, watching fireflies flicker through the dark. Richard handed Maya a small gift box. Inside was a necklace, a silver locket shaped like a star. Inside it was a tiny photo of the three of them, laughing, and a message engraved, "Always part of us." Maya hugged him tightly, not saying a word, just holding him like she never wanted to let go. Rachel leaned against Richard's shoulder, her voice soft. "She gave us the reason," she whispered, "but we gave each other the way." He nodded. "We keep her alive in how we love. And that's forever." The candle they had lit for Amara flickered in the breeze, glowing gently beside the scrapbook and the jar of light. Her story hadn't ended. It had simply changed chapters. As they closed the night, Maya looked up at the stars and said, "She's the brightest one." And maybe she was. Because from the moment a little girl sat by a grave with a whisper in her heart, to the day a stranger broke down in tears and chose to stay, Amara had been guiding them all. Through grief, through memory, through love that never stopped echoing. Time moved forward, as it always does, but in their home, Amara's memory never faded. It matured. It became something woven into their daily lives, not heavy like a shadow, but steady like a heartbeat. Her name was spoken casually now, comfortably, without tears. "Amara would have liked this," or "This song reminds me of her." She was part of the rhythm, not as a ghost, but as a sister, a daughter, a light. One spring morning, Maya brought home a school project, a family tree. She filled it out carefully, placing Amara's name next to hers, with a small hand-drawn heart between them. Under Richard's name, she wrote in neat print, "Dad found me through love." Rachel saw it and had to step out of the room, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming beauty of how Maya had named the truth, not by biology, but by presence. They framed the project and hung it in the hallway. Visitors would sometimes pause, noticing the heart, the titles, the quiet courage in the child's words. One friend of the family asked, "How did you explain all this to her?" Richard answered simply, "We didn't. She explained it to us." Because somehow, Maya had understood something many adults still struggle with. That love is not about who arrives first, but who stays, and how they love when it matters most. Rachel started writing again, this time, not in private. With Maya's encouragement, she submitted a piece to a local parenting magazine. It was titled "The Daughter Who Gave Me Back My Voice." It told of losing Amara, of nearly losing herself, and of the slow, sacred return to life. "I didn't just lose a child," she wrote. "I lost a future I had imagined. But grief gave me something too, a new future I never thought possible." When the piece was published, messages flooded in. From mothers, from fathers, from grandparents and siblings. People who had lost, and people who were still lost. Rachel read each one with tears in her eyes, printing some out and adding them to the scrapbook. "Every story matters," she said. "Every voice deserves to be heard." And just like that, Amara's legacy stretched again, now through pages, through people, through stories shared in her name. A documentary filmmaker reached out after reading Rachel's article. He had lost his own sister years before and had spent his career capturing stories of grief and resilience. "Your family," he said, "shows what healing looks like in motion. Would you be open to sharing it?" At first, they hesitated. It wasn't about fame or visibility. But after much thought, Rachel agreed, if it could help others feel less alone. The filming was intimate. No sets, no scripts, just moments. Maya reading to Amara's grave, Richard fixing a squeaky porch step, Rachel writing at the kitchen table. They included clips from memory nights, snippets of Maya's sky letters, and quiet scenes of the three sitting under the stars. It wasn't dramatic. It was real, and that's what made it powerful. When the documentary was released, titled "The Light We Keep," it resonated far beyond what they expected. It aired in schools, therapy centers, and grief retreats. Strangers wrote from across the world, saying, "You gave me the words I didn't know I needed." One woman from Ireland shared, "I buried my son 2 years ago, and until now, I thought remembering him was wrong. Your story gave me permission to love him out loud." Maya watched the film only once. When it ended, she turned to Rachel and said, "I hope Amara liked it." Rachel pulled her into a hug. She would have been so proud. Richard added, "She's probably shaking the stars right now with excitement." They all laughed, picturing her dancing across the sky, bossing angels around, making up songs like she used to. In the weeks after the documentary aired, Amara's spot became more than a grave. It became a destination, a place where strangers came to sit, to write, to cry, to remember. And always, always, someone had left behind a small gift, a purple flower, a note, a star-shaped charm. Because love, once shared, doesn't fade. It multiplies. And in that sacred patch of earth, Amara's light kept spreading, person to person, heart to heart, world to world. The summer that followed the release of the documentary brought a wave of new beginnings. Local schools invited Rachel to speak to educators about grief in children, how to spot it, how to hold space for it, how to talk about it when there are no easy words. Richard was asked to join as well. At first, he declined. "I'm not a teacher," he said. "I just showed up." But Rachel looked at him and replied, "Exactly. And that's what they need to hear." They began doing the talks together, not as experts, but as survivors, as people who had lost a child, lost time, and found one another again through grief. Their honesty resonated. Teachers approached afterward, sharing stories of students who were quiet, withdrawn, or angry. "Now I know what might be underneath that," one said. "You gave me a way to see them again." Richard never got used to that kind of impact, but he honored it each time, with humility and care. Maya, now 11, decided to start a small podcast called Letters to the Sky. It was just her, reading notes she had written to Amara, and sometimes letters sent in by other kids who had lost siblings. It was quiet and raw, full of long pauses, soft music, and a voice that carried years of wisdom wrapped in innocence. The podcast began to grow. People shared in grief forums, in parenting groups, in classrooms. One letter she read went viral. "Dear Big Brother, I wore your hoodie to school today. Everyone thinks it's mine, but I like pretending you're hugging me." Listeners left comments like, "I didn't know how to cry until this," or "I thought I was the only one." Maya never chased fame. She just wanted people to feel seen, the way she had felt when someone first listened to her by that gravestone. At home, the family stayed grounded. They still visited Amara's grave every week, still added to the scrapbook, still lit the candle on the mantle. But now, it was no longer about holding on to what was lost. It was about continuing what had begun. Amara wasn't frozen in time. She was moving with them. Through every act of love, every conversation, every whispered name under a starlit sky. Autumn came again, painting the world in gold and amber. On the second anniversary of Amara's birthday, since Richard had come into their lives, they decided to do something different. "Let's celebrate her out loud," Maya suggested. "Not just at the cemetery, but with music, with stories, with everyone." So they planned an outdoor celebration at the park, Amara's Day of Light. And it became something unforgettable. Dozens showed up, friends, neighbors, people from the documentary, podcast listeners who had driven hours to be there. There were picnic blankets, live music from a local children's choir, a memory board where people pinned letters, drawings, and photos. Richard built a wooden sign that read, "Every story matters. Every light continues." And beneath it, a table where guests could write the names of those they carried in their hearts. Maya gave a short speech. She stood on a small stage with her purple locket around her neck and said, "Amara isn't here the way we wish she was, but she's still part of everything I do. She's the reason I know how to love this much. And if you're here, it means someone you love helped shape who you are too. That's worth celebrating." The crowd stood in applause. Not loud, not wild, just steady and warm like a heartbeat. That evening, as lanterns were lit once again, the park glowed with soft, golden light. Children laughed. Adults cried. And somewhere in the silence between candle flames and starlight, it felt like Amara was there, laughing, dancing, holding Maya's hand. Rachel leaned against Richard, and for a long time, they said nothing. They didn't need to. This moment, full of life, color, breath, was the answer. Back home, after the guests had gone and the sky turned dark, Maya placed a new note in the jar of light. It said, "We did it. You're not a memory anymore. You're a movement." She smiled as she sealed the lid, then turned off the lights. In the quiet that followed, one could almost hear a giggle, soft and familiar. Because love never disappears. It just learns new ways to be seen. The colder months returned with soft skies and quiet evenings, and with them came a new kind of peace. Their lives were no longer built around what had been lost, but around what had grown in its place: connection, purpose, belonging. Even the quiet felt different now. It didn't ache. It simply existed, like a familiar melody that no longer needed to be sung aloud to be felt. Richard took up woodworking in the garage, often with Maya by his side, handing him nails or sanding the edges of his projects. Together they built birdhouses, picture frames, and small benches for neighbors. "Each one is a thank you," he said, "for every second chance." Maya would sign the bottom of each piece with a star and the letter A. "So she's part of it too," she explained. And Richard never questioned it. Rachel, now writing regularly for grief journals and parenting publications, began collecting stories from other families. Stories of healing, of reunion, of the strange beauty that can come even after the worst has happened. She called the project After the Fall. With every submission, she saw pieces of her own heart mirrored back, proof that they weren't alone, that others had found ways to keep living too. Maya's podcast reached over 100,000 downloads. She was invited to speak at a children's mental health summit, virtually, of course, where she read a new letter. "Dear Amara, today I helped a boy cry for the first time. He said he didn't think it was okay before. I told him you helped me learn that tears don't mean weakness. They mean love has a place to go." When she finished, the chat box filled with thousands of hearts. That night, as the wind howled outside and the fireplace warmed the room, Richard sat by the mantel, staring at the candle, now slightly shorter from nightly use. "We should get a new one soon," he said. Maya shook her head. "Not yet. There's still light in it." And she was right. The flame flickered, soft but strong, like memory, like legacy, like love that continues, even when the world goes quiet. Winter deepened. Snow blanketed the cemetery, softening every edge, turning Amara's spot into a landscape of hush and holiness. They still visited, clearing the snow, lighting a lantern, brushing off the plaque. One day, Maya brought a small snow globe she had made at school. Inside it was a tiny tree, a swing, and 2 stick figures. She placed it at the base of the headstone. "It's us," she said, "so she knows we're okay." Richard brought a letter that day, too. He had written it on old paper, folded neatly in 3. It wasn't long, just a few lines. "Thank you for calling me into this, for letting me love you even from a distance, for giving me Maya, and for giving us the chance to be something more than pain." He placed it under a stone, tucked carefully against the cold marble. No wind came, no voice, but he felt held. At home, preparations quietly began for the holidays. This time, without hesitation, they hung 3 stockings, one for each of them. Maya decorated Amara's with tiny stars and glitter. "It should sparkle," she said. "She'd want that." They filled it not with gifts, but with folded memories, notes of gratitude, sketches, lines from poems. On Christmas Eve, they took turns reading from aloud. When the clock struck midnight, Maya looked up from her hot cocoa and whispered, "I think she's proud of us." Rachel pulled her close. "I think she never stopped being proud." Richard added, "And I think she chose you to carry her light, because you never let it go out." They sat in silence then, watching the fire crackle, a soft snow falling outside the window like a blanket tucking the world in for the night. And in that moment, small, quiet, wrapped in flickering warmth, they knew something sacred. That grief may have brought them together, but love had built the home they now lived in. And Amara, though gone from sight, had never truly left. She was in the light, in the laughter, in every heartbeat that refused to stop, even when everything else had. With the arrival of a new year came a feeling of openness, not the urgency of starting over, but the peace of continuing forward. Maya, now more reflective in her words, had begun journaling daily. She called her notebook the Book of Us. In it, she didn't just write about Amara. She wrote about everything. Dreams she'd had, walks with Richard, the smell of her mom's perfume, the way the sky changed when she was happy. It was her way of mapping life, not as a story of loss, but as a life built with love. Richard read bits of the journal aloud sometimes, with Maya's permission. One entry read, "I used to think Amara disappeared, but now I know she just spread herself out, into my courage, into Dad's hands, into the way Mom holds me when I cry." He looked at Rachel with tears in his eyes. "She's becoming someone amazing." Rachel nodded, because she's surrounded by truth. That truth found its way into unexpected places. Maya's school invited Rachel to lead a workshop on how to talk to children about grief. She brought Maya with her, at Maya's request. "They'll listen if they see me," she said. She stood in front of 20 parents and teachers and said, "You don't have to fix sadness. You just have to sit with it, and not run away when someone needs to speak." No one in the room spoke for a long time after that. Richard had taken on a small mentoring role at a local youth center. Many of the kids were growing up without fathers, and at first, he worried he wasn't the right person. But one boy, quiet, withdrawn, about Maya's age, stayed after one evening. He asked, "Is it true you showed up late but still became someone's dad?" Richard nodded. The boy looked away and whispered, "I hope that happens to me someday." That moment stayed with him for weeks. At home, they added a new ritual. Every Sunday night, they'd light a candle and each say one sentence starting with, "I remember." Sometimes the memories were happy, sometimes bittersweet, sometimes simple. "I remember her laugh. I remember when you first made me pancakes. I remember thinking we might never feel joy again." And every time, they'd end with the same words, "But here we are." Spring returned, softer than before. The garden they once neglected was now alive with blooms, tulips, lavender, sunflowers taller than Maya. They called it Amara's Corner, and every flower bed held something intentional: a poem stone, a wind chime, a hand-painted sign that read, "This is a place where love grows back." Neighborhood children played there often, unaware of its origin, but somehow respectful, like they could feel the story beneath the soil. The Letters to the Sky podcast was picked up by a national platform for children's mental health. Maya's voice now reached thousands of families each week. Despite the growth, she never let it become performance. "I talk like she's still listening," she told Rachel one night. "Because maybe she is." Her words remained simple, but they hit deep, offering children and adults alike permission to feel everything they've been told to hide. That spring, a letter arrived at their home. Handwritten, no return address. It read, "I visited Amara's spot. I didn't know her, but I felt like she knew me. I left something behind. And I took something with me too. Peace. Thank you for keeping her alive in the most honest way I've ever seen." Maya framed the letter and placed it above her desk. "She keeps giving," she whispered. Even now. The family continued hosting memory nights, though now they happened in the community garden behind the library. More people came each time, not just for Amara, but for their own lost ones. Stories were shared, names spoken aloud, tears were shed, and candles lit the path home each time. It was no longer an event. It was a movement, a quiet uprising of people refusing to let silence have the final word. That night, as they packed up from another gathering, Maya asked, "What happens when people stop remembering?" Richard knelt beside her and said, "Then we keep remembering louder. We write, we speak, we live in ways that remind the world love doesn't vanish." And as they walked home, hands intertwined, hearts full, they knew the story wasn't winding down. It was still unfolding, one light at a time. The final days of the school year approached, and with them came the soft excitement of summer. Maya had grown taller, her voice a touch deeper, her thoughts more layered. She was no longer the little girl sitting beside a grave with a stuffed bunny and whispered stories. She was now a young girl who had become a storyteller, a light bearer, and without ever intending to, a guide for others through grief. She was asked to speak at her school's year-end assembly. At first, she hesitated, not out of fear, but out of reverence. "I want to make sure it's true," she said. Together, with Richard and Rachel, she wrote a short speech. On the day of the assembly, She stood on the stage in front of hundreds of students and said, "You don't have to be loud to be heard. You just have to be honest. My sister taught me that. And my family showed me that even broken things can become beautiful again." The auditorium was silent. Teachers wept quietly. Classmates clapped slowly, then louder, until the sound filled the room like thunder. Maya smiled shyly, tucked her notes in her pocket, and walked off the stage into Richard's arms. "That was your voice," he whispered, and she heard every word. It wasn't just pride in his eyes. It was awe. Awe at how healing, when nurtured with love, doesn't just restore, it transforms. That evening, back home, Maya asked if they could update Amara's scrapbook. "It needs a new chapter," she said. She titled it "The Light We Shared." On the first page, she drew a circle of people holding candles, all different ages, sizes, and skin tones. In the center, she wrote, "She started something, and we kept it going." Richard added a note beneath it. "Legacy isn't what we leave behind. It's what we live forward." Later, they sat in the garden, now glowing with string lights and the soft hum of summer bugs. Rachel leaned into Richard. Maya stretched on the bench nearby, her hands behind her head. "I think this," she said softly, "is what forever feels like." And in that moment, warm, gentle, real, they didn't need to speak. Because forever wasn't some distant promise. It was here, now, blooming beneath their feet and written across every heart that had ever dared to love through loss. A year later, they stood once again in front of Amara's gravestone, but this time, not in mourning. It was a celebration. Maya had turned 12. Richard and Rachel had planted a new tree near her bench, a flowering dogwood, and beneath it, a new plaque had been added, engraved with words chosen by all three of them. "For Amara, who taught us that love doesn't end. It just learns new ways to grow." They brought with them letters, drawings, and a playlist Maya had created titled "Songs for My Sister." She sat cross-legged in the grass, reading a new letter aloud. "Dear Amara, I'm doing good. Really good. I still miss you every day. But I also carry you with me now. In how I speak. In how I listen. In how I love. I don't cry as much when I talk about you. Now I smile. You're still my best friend. Always will be." Richard read a letter too. His voice cracked, but he didn't stop. "I never thought I deserved you. But you gave me your sister. And through her, I found the man I was supposed to be. Thank you for loving us into who we are." Rachel didn't read a letter. Instead, she placed a single white rose at the base of the tree, knelt down, and whispered something no one else heard. A private conversation between mother and daughter, carried away by the breeze. As they stood to leave, Maya looked back one last time and said, "Let's keep telling the story." And they did. In every memory night, every letter received, every child who listened to her podcast and wrote back, "Me too." Amara had become more than a memory. She was a movement, a truth, a constellation stitched across the sky of their lives. The family walked away together, hand in hand, the afternoon sun casting long, golden shadows behind them. They didn't speak because nothing needed to be said. They had already written their story, not in chapters, but in moments. And though it began with silence and sorrow, it ended with something eternal. Not with goodbye, but with love that never stopped speaking. Sometimes the most profound stories don't begin with a scream, but with a whisper. A little girl sitting quietly beside a gravestone. A man with a past full of silence. A mother holding love and loss in the same breath. And somehow, from all the pieces that grief tried to scatter, a new family was born. Not from perfection, not from planning, but from presence. From the simple, powerful choice to show up, even when it's too late for words. This story wasn't just about death. It was about what came after. About how love, when remembered out loud, has the power to heal what no apology or time alone ever could. It reminded us that grief is not an end. It is an invitation to honor, to listen, to hold space for what still matters. Amara never spoke another word after she left this world, and yet she never stopped speaking. Her life echoed through every act of courage her family chose after the pain. We don't always get the beginnings we wish for, but what truly defines us is how we write the middle and how we carry the story forward. Maya didn't just remember her sister. She rebuilt her, in every light she gave to the world. Richard didn't reclaim time. He created a legacy from what time had stolen. Rachel didn't lose her voice. She learned how to speak for those who never got the chance. And that is the truest form of love. If this story found a place in your heart, if it reminded you of someone you've lost, someone you've loved, or someone you're still waiting to heal from, then let it stay with you. Let it change the way you love, the way you show up, the way you listen. Because someone in your life may still be waiting for a moment like the one that changed theirs, when grief turned into connection and silence turned into song. If this touched you, we invite you to be part of the echo. Like this video, so it reaches more hearts. Share your thoughts in the comments. Maybe your memory, your letter, your moment. And subscribe to this channel to keep walking with us through stories that matter. Because sometimes, all it takes is one voice, trembling but true, to remind the world, love never leaves. It just learns new ways to be seen.